Now this is a new one for me. I don't know if I've ever filmed an intro to my intro before here, but some things I want to point out before we jump into this video with this very original classic 1970 Torino. As we get under the hood and start going through some stuff, you're going to see things that you might consider to be hackery, you know, and you might be tempted to make some comments about that. And one thing you need to know before we move through this is that the fella that dropped this car off with me to get it set up, you know, he inherited this from his good friend who had passed away, and he's not necessarily a carburetor guy. We all know that there's a lot that goes into getting these set up well, knowledge, know-how, and I've just done this for a long time, and so that's kind of why the car ended up here. You know, I offered to set it up, so here we are. You know, this is a young guy, and really the way to keep people like that in the hobby is to, you know, not give them necessarily a hard time. Just go ahead and help them out, help them along, you know, not really chastise them, I guess. That's how we keep this hobby moving forward. And I know all of you guys here that follow me on this channel are largely respectable people, and I think you're going to understand. So with that, let's jump right in and let's get this old Torino set up. Howdy my friends, and welcome to the channel today. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289, here on YouTube. And today we have something a little bit different. Folks have reminded me that, hey, do you remember that you're a YouTuber and you're supposed to make videos and all of that? So, you know, I film not a whole lot of what I do, but today we have this fella's car in here, and it is under the hood. There's some serious debacle-ville going on. It didn't run, it had the trailer in here. And so it's a really nice car to not be on the road, okay? And it's finally warm here in Iowa. So we're gonna see if we can help him out, get it on the road. He's a fuel injection and diesel guy. So you can imagine that some tomfoolery went on when he tried to put in his own distributor and some other things. So we're gonna see if we can get all that cleaned up. And I'm sure we're gonna have a chuckle or two, you know, sorry about that at your expense. I know you're watching this video. I'm not gonna say his name, but anyway, let's jump in. All right, so under the hood, it is a 351 Cleveland, which I think it's been like 10 years since I worked on a Cleveland. Not that it's a whole lot different than the Windsor Series Ford or anything else. You know, a pushrod engine is a pushrod engine is a pushrod engine. Chevrolet, Ford, pretty much everything operates off the same premise. But it was an AC car, which has been kind of removed. It's a two-barrel. It has a Protronics in there that there's something going on. And actually, ironically, it has a carb cheater, and we'll get to that in a moment. But there's some really interesting wiring over there that probably has to do with a lot of the issues. Hopefully nothing got burned up, but you know, we have a lot of parts in case it did. Again, it's a really, really nice car. So I'm almost afraid to be laying hands on it here. Just a normal automatic car. I think this is a 1970 Torino, perhaps. Pretty cool tail end on the thing. So where to begin with all of this? This plug wire arrangement going on here kind of stresses me out. And I never got the full story of how he tried to install the distributor. I know he didn't understand the rotor lining up with things when it's dropped in, so you know, who knows where cylinder one's supposed to be. We're probably going to pull this out because there's actually an orientation that you can drop a distributor in where with the firing order in mind, the plug wires all lay really nice, which is not the case here. We got some of this going on. We have a carb cheater in place and it's not wired to the battery, so that's already suspicious. This looks like the power wire. And ironically, the ground wire looks like it's on the other side of the starter solenoid. I'm not sure what this is tied to the eye of the starter solenoid. It looks like it goes to this relay. I'm gonna have to actually look at this to be able to explain to you guys what maybe is the intent of what's going on here. Some of this stuff is just hard if you don't have a background in it. I'm a programmer by day. I do a lot of heavy electrical in a manufacturing plant, you know. Some of this stuff just happens to be second nature to me. All right, so I've had a good look around here, and I want you to keep in mind, I was told that this would kind of pop off, sputter, you know, it'd never idle or anything, but it would actually light off. So remember that as we go through this. So starting off, it's a Protronix Igniter 3 Pro Billet Distributor, Igniter 3 module and coil. Really nice units, really like putting them on Fords. A lot of Ford people don't like them, but that's because they get wired wrong. Where all Fords have a resistive lead instead of a ballast resistor, so it's a lot less obvious, and basically that drops the voltage. Now the Protronix requires a full 12 volts to the module and coil, or else it'll eventually burn itself out. Now we don't have that going on here. We're coming around, everything, you know, we got some interesting stuff going on, spliced together. This looks like the on signal wire for the carb cheater. Some other stuff going on here, the power for the module to the coil. And then this is where it starts to get really interesting, okay? This goes over to a relay, which sends power from the battery to all that, which is normal. But where it gets weird is the main power here to the carb cheater is on the positive side of the starter solenoid, but then the negative wire is on the other side of the starter solenoid. And how that works, the starter solenoid, when you turn the key, it pulls this big, basically it's a magnetic solenoid, you know, it bridges this connection. And so this would basically be an open circuit. It looks really bad, but it would be an open circuit. So when you're cranking, carb cheater, you know, wouldn't be on. You know, not a big deal. You wouldn't want to wire it that way, but, you know, nothing too crazy yet. Now where it gets weird is this is the signal wire for the relay. And basically, the only way I could see this running, what would have happened is power would have went through the carb cheater, out the ground. This is no longer connected, and then it would have connected on the eye here of the starter solenoid, turned the relay on, and powered the ignition. So pretty amazing. Almost a modern marvel that this could possibly work. I could totally see it working, and it's probably the most unorthodox thing I've ever seen. Yeah, I just don't even know if I can lean on this car. This is just not my typical MO of things to work on here. Oh, thank goodness. This is just like, I gotta show you this radiator hose, okay? This is like the factory Ford radiator hose, still with the staple in it from when it was manufactured. These spark plugs probably haven't been out of here since, you know, 1979 or ever. And it's very black. Now I really don't want to damage the super original engine and super original car here. And so just like, check this out. Here's the thing that I was referencing. It's still got the staple, the auto light, you know, this is some original stuff going on here from back in the day. But I don't think I can get a 15/16 socket down in there. So I'm gonna do the old school way here of just bumping it and getting to the compression stroke, because I have no idea where our distributor is. And so I just need to come up to true TDC and see if we're even close. I have a feeling I'll be pulling it out. This car is just so low to the ground. Oh, okay, so we're gonna jump the starter solenoid here just to roll it over, see if it'll even move. Some abnormal sound. I'm gonna go with the battery's probably dead. Let's just go steal the battery and see what happens. This thing's just floating in here anyway. So I think we're going to borrow the Maverick's battery here. I drive the Maverick every day to work and back, 50 miles round trip. So, you know, I know it's got a good unit in it. I've actually had to buy tires for it, which is wild. I've put 60,000 miles on this car since I've owned it. And for whatever reason, this ugly pile of junk car just seems to be my favorite car to drive. It does get pretty good gas mileage, and you know, when you stand on it, it does get out of its own way. It's got a mild build 302 and then a 4-speed close ratio top loader. But all that aside, I think that's what we're here for. And here we go. Oops. That's fine. What wouldn't have been fine is if I would have hit those saddles. I think That would have been the end of my life if I would have smashed those. Mama would not have been very pleased with me, I don't think. If you ever work on other people's cars, you encounter all the things that you do to your own stuff that you take for granted. Like these have been clamped on with the force of 1,000 suns, and my own stuff, what I'll do is just, just tight enough where it has continuity, but I can still wiggle it pretty hard and get it off. So hopefully I don't break these in the process, because gall dang, someone got their gorilla arms out when they did that. All right, round 2 here. Maybe. There we go. Okay, now we're in business. That worked out too good. So all I was doing there was rotating the engine while I had my finger in the cylinder 1 spark plug hole. The reason that's important is because the TDC mark will come up on the balancer twice where you can be 180 degrees off. The cam rotates half as fast as the crank. It's a 2-to-1 ratio going on there with the timing chain. And anyway, 4-stroke cycle being what it is. And so you just want to be sure you're on the compression stroke of TDC, because that's where our ignition should be kind of directed towards cylinder 1 in this case. So as you saw, we had pressure blow my finger off, and now we get down in here, and might I say this thing had gobs of compression seemingly, and there we are. So someone has pre-marked that, and that's going to be very convenient also because this car's low to the ground and I don't want to lay on the dirt. So conveniently for our visual cues here, the distributor rotor is pointing directly back at the carb. I'm going to drop our cap back on here, and I believe this is spark plug wire number 1 sitting over there. We trace it over here, and it is. And so if you look at this square, we're pointed way off in this case. So the ignition timing is probably wildly out. So I could take this distributor, twist it all around in here to try and get it correct. But, and a lot of people say, oh, the distributor's a tooth off. I read that in the forum stuff all the time. I think people misunderstand what that means. But in this case, that's fairly accurate because we just don't have enough motion in the twist of the distributor to basically pull this into where we want it. So we need to pull it out, basically preload the distributor the proper way and drop it in. And then I'd be pretty confident to try and light it off. And this is obviously rapidly devolving here, where obviously I'm making great use of my cart, but insert joke about Ford, they obviously knew you'd be working on it all the time, so they gave you ample room to just put your tools all over the place. Now conveniently, someone has removed the AC compressor, which generally on Fords you have to fight with if they're equipped with one. So we're already ahead there, but you just want to be careful before you pull a distributor. All this mouse poop and everything, as soon as you pull that out, that's going to fall right in the hole and, fairly undesirable. If you kind of go against what it says in the book for plug wire layout and you make this cylinder 1, you can see that the plug wires end up laying very nicely on a Ford distributor. So if you want to take a mental snapshot of that, then they lay pretty nice. Now these were previously cut to length for a different orientation, but they worked out okay. Now there's something with spark plug wires that I would consider to be a myth. I've never experienced it myself, I guess, but you don't want any 2 cylinders that are firing right beside each other on the cap. You don't want those plug wires touching, because apparently you can get like this crosstalk. Now myself, I've never experienced that, but still, you probably noticed it when we were panning around here in the engine bay. I set up the plug wires over here so that the 2 cylinders that fired one after another, there was a plug wire kind of splitting the gap between those. So I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that. I haven't. It's easy to avoid, I guess, with a layout. But I don't even know if you have to. Man, it's hotter than a son of a gun today. It's like 90 degrees in old Iowa. Now you can see the cam to distributor gear engagement here. And so you see how it rotates back on itself. So if we wanted it pointed in a certain direction, all we really should have to do is be able to pick it up, pre-clock it, and drop it in. But since Ford likes to have the most overcomplicated distributors on the planet, we cannot do that because the oil pump drive shaft is ever so slightly in the way. Now, one really cool thing about the Pertronix line of distributors is they use what is called a melanized gear. And the reason that's important is because they work for both flat tappet and roller cam engines. So this engine factory had a flat tappet. So the distributor normally would need to have a cast gear, and then if you put a roller cam in it or something, that distributor wouldn't work. Now, I've always thought this sounds hokey, but I've racked up, tons of miles on the Maverick, and then I have an F100 also that I have tons and tons of miles on. Both of them have Pertronix units with the melanized gear. One actually, the Maverick has a flat tappet, the F100 has a roller, and I've never had any issues in all those miles. So that's one really nice positive that makes them really easy to work with. So +1 for Pertronix on that front. And this is why you want to be real careful. Check that out. A nut from probably the old coil before the Pertronix fell in there. And luckily it did not make its way in when we pulled the distributor out. So again, we're going to put some rags in there and clean all this up. Oh look, my nemesis, red RTV. That definitely means an idiot worked on this at some point. Now I've gone over this before, but when you drop in a distributor, you really want to make sure that it's fully seated. In this case, you can see that it's not. We're pointed where we want to go, but it won't go all the way in. And what it's doing is hanging up on the oil pump drive shaft, which in this case, this is the Ford style, overly complex, hex style. And so what you can do, and a lot of people say, is you can kind of set it in there and bump the starter and it will fall in. But, I'm not going to go through it, but some weird stuff can happen when you do that. And you can just simply tape a socket on the end of an extension, and it's a little bit of take the distributor out, move it ever so slightly, drop it back in until it fully seats. And that way you don't risk damaging anything. I know there's quicker ways, but, why risk it, especially on a car like this. And just for the sake of reference, if you look way down in there, that tip of the shaft that you can see, just the tip of it sticking, oh boy, just the thing down there that's in the hole, all right? That's what we're trying to engage with. So we're gonna drop down in, just turn it ever so slightly. This is gonna be a game of cat and mouse, I'm sure. So in goes the distributor. Where we want one to be is here. We're going to pre-clock it. Get in there. And it's being kind of ornery. There we go.
Let's go get the coffee.
All right, so that's your butt. All right. The distributor's in, by the way.
Alright, smart car stuff, blah blah blah.
Gremlin beside me doesn't want to be filmed, so we'll respect her wishes and not. Oh, she's leaning forward. Okay, she's over there, I promise. So after a short intermission here, our distributor is in fact in. We can look back here. Our rotor is lined up with our mark we made on our distributor body that coincides with spark plug wire number 1 on the cap. I've advanced it ever so slightly. We're still lined up at TDC with the crank. Normally I'll actually advance the crank 10 degrees or so and drop the distributor in square at that point, but just with how we did it, was easier to do this than just advance the body of the distributor. It's clocked the way we want, where our cap is going to look good. So all that's good. Now I need to kind of figure out what in the world I'm going to do with this wiring if I want this thing to actually light off. At this point, I should probably verify that the relay is actually wired correctly. I've been making a lot of assumptions, so I'm probing the positive post on the Pertronics coil there. You know, we're hooked to the negative of the battery, so I'm just gonna simulate the key. I assume this is the signal that pulls in the relay here and connects the battery to everything else. I do hear it there, and we are getting 12 volts. So technically, I think I could set this on the battery and fire it. At least the spark plug's going in here easier than it came out. But aside from my 64 Galaxy, it's like every single old car I've had, just the wiring is absolutely butchered. So it's always like a scavenger hunt to try and figure out what was going on at some point, or what someone's idea was. Usually good intentions, and it probably makes sense to them, but I have no idea what they were thinking generally. And that isn't necessarily me saying they did anything wrong, you know? It's just, I don't know what right was supposed to look like, and generally things get changed around, and I don't know, you know, I just don't know. So, gotta do it my own way, doing it live. So far off to a good start. Can I get this on here? Thank you. It's even my dominant hand. It's kind of shameful. Just trying to cross my I's and dot my T's here. I got the vacuum line, or I just, whatever. You know the phrase, you know the thing. Anyway, I got this vacuum port off of manifold vacuum. This has one of those weird vacuum thermal tree things. And, you know, after all these years, questionable. And, you know, that was some primordial soup stuff of whatever. Anyway, we're just going to ignore that for now. We're hooked up to the ported port of the 2100 auto light, or I guess this looks like maybe a 2150. Either way, same difference. So we can see what's going on there. We have our timing light in place, and I think, nope, one more thing we want to do is this choke is completely closed, and we just don't want to fight that when we got all of this going on. So let me just loosen these 3 screws here, and then we can rotate this bad boy and it'll open that right up for us. Choke's loose, and we're just going to open it all the way up so we're not fighting that. And I don't know, we'll just put 1 screw in because we do want to set the choke up for sure, but that's just one variable that we don't want to be dealing with. We got to give it a little bit of foot feed till it has just a little bit of temp, but it's so hot today that I'm really not worried about it. Oh, that wouldn't have worked. So is that going to stay there? Oh, that'll work. Science. Just as long as I don't shut the hood. All right. A lot of tomfoolery going on. We're not going to put that in yet. A lot of tomfoolery going on under there. Normally, you want to be careful if you have points ignition about leaving it hot. If the point gap is closed, you know, that coil is a ticking time bomb about to explode. But this being a Pertronics Igniter 3, you know, it can sit there hot. That's not going to do anything without cranking RPM. You know, ultimately just going to run the battery down, and that's about it. So maybe if I shut the door, this will shut up. Oh, my arm's my camera mount. All right, we're going to give it 1 pump, hold it like a 1/4 throttle maybe. Try and catch it because there's no choke here. This car sounds pretty good. Everyone loves the 351 Clevelands. I've never actually sat behind the wheel of one personally. I've rode in them with a wild man who drove like he was completely insane. So I do know they can lay down some pretty decent power in stock configuration. Timing doesn't seem perfect, but gotta hold it for a second here until we can get some temp and it'll idle on its own. Unless that's now. Ooh, we're doing pretty good. All right, we're gonna be quick about it. It's definitely got the danger fan on it. Use my extra ridiculously long fingers here. See if I can do this all with one hand. Pretty darn hard to see down there. Looks like we're at 6 degrees or so. So that's, in my opinion, pretty late. That might be what the book says, but everyone knows how I feel about the book. So we left the distributor loose so we can advance it. You heard RPM go up and everything smooth out. The carburetor is pretty questionable. This fan scenario is very sub-ideal. Carburetor is not very happy, but on the ported port it is good, so it doesn't have too much curb idle screw. As you see, as you increase the curb idle, you can see the ported vacuum starts showing vacuum, or the ported port starts showing vacuum rather. So, you know, that looks okay. It's just definitely like the idle circuit's kind of questionable. That belt's really annoying. Let's go hear what it sounds like from the back end. That's a weird thing to say. It's either burning a lot of oil or it's actively trying to flood. So we'll look at the carburetor in a second. So yeah, very clearly pretty squirrely. Oh yeah, that's right. Duh. Hot wired. See if we can get this all in one clip here. Ta-da! Okay, so we don't want to run that too long like it is. First thing I'm going to do is try and set the mix screws equally and refire it, but you know, there could just be a lot of squirrely stuff going on. I'm not a super big fan of the Autolite 2150. I'm pretty sure this is I'm not going to go through reading all this stuff, but you can kind of tell a difference where the 2150 has this kind of rounded look, where the older school style ones are more flat, and they do seem to be more reliable and less temperamental. But I've never loved where the mix screws are. They're very inaccessible. Maybe that was by intent because they didn't want people monkeying with them back in the day, but pretty annoying now. So what I've done is I've ran both of them all the way in and I've went a half turn out. Now this engine should not run like that, at least very well. And if it does, that tells me that this thing is flooding somewhere. And I don't have a carburetor rebuild kit or anything for it, so I'd hate to have to pull the top off and start monkeying around. It doesn't look like it's been opened since, like, I don't know, 37 Vietnams ago. So let's just hit the key and see what happens. It's probably why it fired off so easy without any form of choke whatsoever, but really seems like it's flooding. Oh, come on. And it's idling, which it totally should not be doing. It runs almost entirely the same. And it went from, like, I don't know, 2.5 turns out or something pretty significant to a half turn. Shouldn't be the same. If I had to guess, we're gonna get out of here. This is, oh, I guess I don't need this anymore. So if I had to guess, you know, the power valve on a 2100 is just like a Holly, probably petrified, cracked, and we're probably just pulling raw fuel through the power valve right now in this thing. You know, it sat a long time. It only has, like, I mean, this is probably 17,000 original miles, so, you know, it's the crux of the diaphragm stuff. This doesn't last too long sitting around. And the only time I've ever had stitches in my life is I put my hand in a fan, just like something we have here. Luckily, I still have all my fingers. Shh, quiet now. So anyway, I need to kind of decide what I want to do. I don't really like quote unquote giving up on stuff. I wanted to put a 4-barrel on anyway, but I really just kind of want to make it work right the way it is. I don't know. I better just see what I have here. Oh boy. Unfortunately, I do have a 2-barrel kit for the 2100, 2150, whatever that is in there. So we might be getting into it. Now, fortunately, it's not extremely invasive. It's on the underside here, which I'm sure I'll pull off in a second and you'll see. But on like a Holley, a power valve, you know, this is a metering block here. It's kind of this guy here. Let me flip this around the right orientation. And basically it has restrictor orifices in it where when a certain vacuum rating is met, it'll supply extra fuel to the primary circuit. So you have a cruising AFR and then you have a hard throttle AFR. So the power valve itself isn't responsible for the volume of fuel. It just controls at what vacuum the fuel is added. Now this is kind of a neat dual stage power valve, which you don't see those anymore. And so I've actually drilled and tapped these at one point. This might have been my test unit from like 10 years ago. These are where your restrictor orifices are, and usually they're cast in. You know, I've clearly modified these. But on a power valve, oftentimes they say the vacuum rating that they open at, so 6.5. But if they rupture, it's a diaphragm in there. If it were to rupture, then you have fuel from the bowl going into the engine completely unregulated. And sometimes an engine will kind of run. It just depends on how bad the rupture is. But one thing you can be sure is that the more you drive it, if this is the case, the worse it's going to get. Is this what's going on here? I don't know. We'll see. Now, a lot of folks think I have like some weird dislike for Edelbrock's, and that's not necessarily the case. In fact, I have a new one right here, and there's a few of them over on the shelf. But all of that aside, I think it has the superior design on the enrichment because it uses springs and needles. And although they might get seized in place, you know, you can always free them up and get them working where, you know, a diaphragm, after it sits, generally it's just going to get petrified and hard and eventually rupture, and it's all over. All right, I think everything is free. Nope. One vacuum line. There we go. Nope. 2 vacuum lines. Now it's free. There we go. Don't spill fuel. Pouring one out for my dead homies. Who I guess I don't really have any homies, so pouring one out for myself, question mark? All right. Only half of that ran down my arm. That's what you want. All right, so you flip the carb over on these auto lights and the power valve should be right below here. And it's kind of suspicious because it's got some fuel residue going on here. But if I remember right, there shouldn't be any fuel on this side. This should be the vacuum side of the diaphragm. Stands to reason geometrically. So usually I have pretty highly modified stuff at this point. So something like a 2-barrel just never lasted too long in my ownership. And would you look at that, there is. So there's our problem. It's definitely a blown power valve. You can actually see, so let me get over here so I can make sure I'm showing you. So there's all of our fuel. Bad. Come on, focus. There we go. So there's our vacuum channel. Comes right through here, manifold vacuum, right into here. So our power valve was indeed blown, passing fuel just raw and unmetered into the engine, which, you know, non-atomized fuel just isn't going to do too well. And it was a pretty telltale sign when we ran the mix screws in, it was still able to run. So it was getting plenty of supplemental fuel through the power valve. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a cameraman, so you're going to have to deal with looking at my nipples, but I wanted to get this in real time because this is one of those things that people say all the time that totally isn't true. Now, just because that came loose really easily, so I'm sure it's not going to be the case. And it's not a Holley technically. long thread on this guy. You can see how wet that is, so that soldier has definitely played his part and he is done. But a lot of times you'll see that the power valve gasket splits, and a lot of people will say it has two gaskets, and that is not the case. They just dead shear, and if you try and use one or the other side of that, it will not seal. I've tried it for the sake of science. It is a waste of your time, especially on a Holly where it's pretty invasive to get to. Do not do it. It didn't happen here, but it's definitely happens on Hollies a lot. Almost every time, honestly. Just always want to use a new gasket. And this thing, it's been on here for a long time, just dead petrified. Definitely my least favorite job is scraping gaskets. Would probably help if I didn't have a suicide razor here. I guess you probably can't say that online. You know, it's sharp on both ends, so, which I've found out on numerous occasions, unintentionally. Side note, there's your power valve restrictors in the Autolite. They look like they actually have a pressed in piece of brass, which would have been an expensive manufacturing thing to do, as opposed to just a rough casting that's drilled. So that's kind of impressive. So I guess we're gonna take just the power valve out and put it in. This is one of those things where I don't really like to dive too deep into something that doesn't need it. If it isn't broke, don't fix it, because there's a good chance something else will go wrong in the process. Screws will strip or anything, you know. So if this makes it run good, we're not going to go any deeper, and we're going to be happy about it. So now we got our mix screws ran all the way in, and the Autolites are a little bit different than the Hollies, and so I think I'm just going to start with 1/2, 1, maybe 1.5 turns out, see where that gets us. Now keep in mind, it's real easy to look at screws and start thinking that they're supposed to look the same. You know, when they're bottomed out, the slot on the screw is different from one side to the other. It's extremely important, especially on a dual plane like this, to keep them the same. So obviously this one started at a different position, so, and I already forgot as I was talking. So there's 1/2, 1, and that's 1.5, we think. At least we've done our due diligence. So let me put this cover back on. We'll slap this back on the engine. All right, little buddy, on you go. I have high hopes for improvement, because clearly that was a pretty significant problem that looks like we have figured out. So really don't want to take the top of this carb apart. Everything's hooked back up, carb's back on, fuel line is secure, fuel line is secure, fuel line is secure, because I've done that before. That'd be really a shame in this engine bay. So it's going to crank for a little moment here, I'm sure. Get out of the way, door. Come on now. Oh, boy. Did I have to make all those old man sounds when I got in? Oh, my goodness. Shh. Be all right. All right. That was probably just all the residual fuel in the intake. Oh. Oh, there we go. Burning all that garbage out. What? Oh, we're not sending clouds out the back. Big surprise. It's idling 1,000 times cleaner too. Is one would expect, you know. Naturally, if you don't have just some random unregulated fuel leak, just raw fuel into the intake manifold, it's gonna run better, so it's not too bad. Obviously a vast improvement here. I'd like to act like I'm smart, but you know, I've driven this stuff, only carbureted stuff, for like the last 10, 15 years or so. So it stands to reason if you're gonna do that, you probably need to be pretty good about setting stuff up. And you know, I just know a lot of this stuff because I've seen a lot of stuff. And that's why I do this whole YouTube thing, so that I can just pass all the knowledge that I learned through pain and suffering forward. So, you know, maybe you guys don't have to. Okay, so, oh no, the key, for God's sake. Me. Shut up. Okay. Sure you all wanted to hear that. I even annoyed myself. Oh, and I left the lights on. Bink. Now what I'm looking for is just on the onset of when that needle starts to move. So right now it's technically 0. So you see it there, it kind of moved a little bit. So that's pretty good. It's right where, as soon as you get into the throttle at all, we're engaging the timed vacuum or the ported port. Believe it or not, you can close it down too far, and that's also bad. You underexpose the transfer slots, and the transition is really poor. In fact, here, I'll just do it for you. So why don't I just lower it too far here? See how it kind of stumbles and falls on its face, even though vacuum looks good? Here we go. Just on the onset, and then it revs a lot cleaner. So, you know, you got to be really particular, but if you do what you're supposed to, you can get some pretty good results. I moved our vacuum gauge to a manifold vacuum port, and remember, this vacuum gauge is below 0, so it says 18 right now, so it's pretty darn close to 20. It's nice and steady, so we know the valve train is good. If you see a rapidly moving needle, usually you have a bad valve somewhere. AFR looks okay, but we're still letting temp come up. Now, we went through the idle adjustment, and you can tell that it's still idling ever so slightly too high. And this is the thing where it's like, well, what initial timing do I run? Now, so check this out here. So as you saw, we pulled a little bit of timing out of it, and the idle RPM went down to a much more reasonable RPM. So it looks like we're at about 14 degrees or so. And what I'm doing here is I'm just looking for the TDC mark on the balancer to be lining up with our timing pointer, and whatever my little wheelie knob is on is the ignition timing we're at. So we're at 14 degrees initial. Everything seems happy. I think we're a little on the rich side. So now I think this is all okay. Let's adjust our mix screws. You can see it's kind of hunting ever so slightly. And most people would be good with that, but I'm just a little too particular. Now I know I've said this a lot in other videos, but I really want to drive this point home because just I see it get regurgitated incorrectly a lot lately on the internet. The internet goes through cycles, you know. It'll grab onto a piece of bad tech and just perpetuate it for a while. So the truth of setting mix screws with a vacuum gauge is it's the easiest way to do it is to start out too rich and then lean it out. And as you lean it down, you'll reach a point of the highest manifold vacuum, and then you can actually lean it farther and it's going to dwell. The vacuum is going to dwell there. You want to go to that first onset of being lean, okay? That first point of the highest vacuum, and then you want to go an eighth to a quarter turn richer from there. Reason being, as soon as you shut the hood, everything goes on, fuel being the way it is today, all that extra underhood heat affects the fuel density, and you're going to want that extra eighth to a quarter of a turn, I promise you. You don't want to take my word for it, you can go give it a shot, because it's pretty revealing. But it's kind of hard to tell when I'm, under the hood what I'm doing, but that's the general idea there. So I think the carburetor is pretty good, at least for a preliminary test, but there's some stuff we definitely need to do with the ignition now that we have our initial timing figured out. So we have the cap and rotor off of our Pertronix Igniter 3 distributor, and we can see the advanced mechanism and all the goings on there, which is, if you're familiar with Fords like I am or have watched my stuff, you know that this is just a superior design to the factory Ford stuff. Now, all you really in-depth guys that got machines like that, and stuff, I understand that, you might have a different opinion, but for the everyday hot rodder, which is the info I try and put forward, these are really nice. Electronic ignition, everyone thinks it's all about the hot spark and all that tomfoolery. Although that's good, what's nice is the ease of tunability and the availability of tuning parts, which the Igniter 3 comes with a setup. And so we're at 14 degrees initial, and we want to be mindful of our total timing. Now, I know from working with these distributors for years and, having the paperwork pretty much permanently burned into my brain, that this distributor adds 24 degrees of mechanical timing. So that would be too much with our 14 degrees initial, but the beauty of a tunable aftermarket distributor is you have advanced stops, and they're here somewhere in this car. And that's important because it's not about having too much. Boy, this was some serious Halloween stuff. Ooh, candy, look at that. Getting sidetracked. It's not about having more timing, it's just about having the right timing. And so that looks like what we're after. Oh hey, the air filter, that's probably important. And anyway, with 14 degrees initial and 24 degrees total, that's just too much. And that's into the danger zone for mechanical timing. But I went ahead and put the 20 degree limiters in. I don't know why Pertronix couldn't have just stamped 20 on them instead of 10, which means 20. So basically that's pulling out 4 degrees of mechanical timing. These look pretty Mickey Mouse, hocus pocus, but ironically they do work really well. And they are darn accurate for what they are, which is impressive for a bent piece of garbage, but they did a pretty good job on them. All that aside, I think we're good. We can put the cap and everything back on. We're getting close to be able to do a preliminary drive, but we'll check timing. I've now hooked up Vacuum Advance to the ported port, which, I'll save you the lengthy explanation as I've gone through that many times. If you look up manifold versus ported, you'll see my ugly mug talking about it in several different scenarios. So all of that aside, let me get this reassembled. And we've moved from the 90 degree part of the day where now it's dark outside, and we've moved to the 100% humidity point, especially in this garage. So yeah, welcome to Iowa if you've never been here. Definitely, if you have the option, just keep on driving, all right? Now you probably saw that I didn't change the advanced springs, and that's because as per the documentation, the silver springs are in the distributor. Total timing is all in by, can't hardly keep my glasses on today. Total timing is all in by 3,500 RPM, and that's okay. That's safe, still fairly effective, but safe. And this not being my car, me being pretty picky and observant, and can't really speak for other people, you can still have fun and it'll still perform well, but you're less likely to damage anything that way. So I just left the silver springs alone. But again, when you do all this stuff, it's real tunable. You can look at the documentation and then, make your spring selection, stop bushing selection, all of that accordingly. I do always recommend verifying with a timing light because I've seen the paperwork not be correct before. So it's definitely a worthwhile endeavor to do so. Now it's getting pretty late here, but we are moving along. I don't think I want to drive it out in the dark. We got a few things left to do. I still need to wire the ignition correctly. And, we did just hook up the vacuum advance. So, I kind of wanted to see. I haven't had an opportunity to do this yet, just to see how well it starts up on its own. If I can do the long arm special here. That's what we like to see. Makes good sense to check the vacuum advance now, so if I rev it and it falls on its face, the vacuum advance is adding too much timing. Which Pertronic stuff is generally 15 degrees, so that's well within the realm of reasonability. I don't know, we're looking pretty good at this point. Nice and smooth. It's nice when a good looking car actually runs as good as it looks. It's okay to have a garbage car if it runs bad, not that the Maverick does. Too cool, I'm digging it. And in classic form, I lied to you guys, where after I used the timing light and I saw when the advance curve was starting to move from its initial mechanical setting, obviously we had the vacuum advance unplugged at this point, I didn't like it, okay? So I'm going to put one of the light springs in and one of the medium springs, and it should pop off that initial mechanical timing point a little bit sooner. Total timing will come in a little bit quicker, but we were way safe before and we'll still be safe. But these are some of the reasons why you always should check with a timing light, because things don't always match the paperwork, and this is one of those examples. And that definitely, if you're a nut job peak performance guy like me or whatever, some try hard, I guess, maybe you could call me, you're going to feel that in your off-idle transition. So things like this are very important. So I'm going to get this done, and I'm going to go to bed, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow. All right, my friends, so it's been a few days, and I don't remember exactly where I was at. I think I had the engine all dialed, and yeah, I don't know. This is what happens when you jump in and out of things. So let me just figure out where we are and get our bearings. I think we were doing some electrical stuff, and then we're ready to drive this thing. So I'm kind of seeing from my splicer here and this wire, I remember I had to basically hot wire it to run it before because of all this electrical that we've kind of ironed out. I've given the Torino back its respective battery. I've since charged it up. The Maverick has received its normal battery back, probably the following day from all this, again, daily driver. You can see I didn't run into the saddle, so that's good. So with that, it looks like I've unhooked the voltage regulator here, and I know one of these is a signal wire from the key, and we ought to be able to tag our wire for our relay, which runs our ignition and things, into that, and so everything should work and we can pull this thing out. All right, so, oh God, the awful sound here. We'll set the key to run mode. Does the horn work? Oh, nice. And then we'll come around here and I have the multimeter hooked in here. We're just on the negative of the battery and we're probing the connection here. So the green wire looks like it has voltage. I want to say it's the green or the yellow. I could look it up, but I'm lazy, I guess. This is more effort, actually. And that one has voltage, so I think it's the green. So let me turn the key off, and the one we're looking for is the one that doesn't have voltage with the key off. So there we go. That's looking pretty good. Let's take a look at our yellow wire here. And if I can get a good connection. Hello, hands. I don't think, there we go. I don't think that's the one we want. So I think if we tag to the green wire, we'll be okay. So kind of hurts me to splice into factory wiring, especially on such an original car. But there's already been a little bit of tomfoolery that's gone on with this signal wire here. There's something in line, so, you know, not entirely a love-loss scenario. Now, this shouldn't be pulling a whole lot off the signal because, again, this is just pulling the relay in, and the relay is what's passing power from the battery to everything else. So, you know, we're not really putting any extra load on this signal lead, so hopefully it's pretty inconsequential. And, you know, there's things I recommend doing and things I don't, and kind of this hack-together wiring, you know, wouldn't be necessarily what I'm promoting doing, but it's probably going to work here okay and be just fine. Probably won't just because I said that, but let's find out. All right, my friends, first time starting from the key like a normal vehicle. Weird if it works. So 3, 2, 1. I like it. Got the choke disabled still, so just gonna take a little bit of foot feed. What a good sounding car. Amazing how well something can run when the power valve isn't just dumping a relentless amount of fuel into the engine. Overall, not too bad, although I do have some mild regrets in not opening the garage door with that power valve previously being blown. All that soot and carbon accumulated in the exhaust, and when I revved it up, it painted me a nice picture on my garage door, so that was a genius move. Just goes to show how bad it was, you know. It's just blowing all that garbage out at this point. Figured it's worth checking here to make sure that everything's still charging, you know. We want to see something above like 12.5 volts. Ooh, and that's a stout alternator. So we're sitting here charging at 14, so I don't think we caused ourselves any issues tying in where we did, so that's good. I still wouldn't say I recommend wiring it like that, but I don't know, in a pinch, it does work. Again, I'm not saying to do it, but if you had to, it seems like you can. Seems to be doing an okay job idling nice and smooth here. Kind of a dangerous spot for those wires to be. I see the fan belt didn't self-heal, so that's unfortunate. It's pretty tight, so I don't want to tighten it up any further because, you know, if you really get tight on the belts, it's going to blow your water pump, it's going to blow out the bearings in your alternator and all your accessories. You don't want to do it. This belt is probably ancient and wore out, and so it's just slipping. So something to keep in mind when you have these old cars, you know, you can cause a lot of destruction just by thinking you can grab onto that alternator and really tighten it up. So something to think about. All right. Good enough for me. Shuts right down, doesn't run on. That's good. So I think it's time to get this air filter out of here so we can drive down the road. Oh yeah, I forgot. Got the Halloween 1000 going on back here. Don't eat the candy, just get the filter. There we go. I think I see why the air filter wasn't on it now. It's not clearing the Pertronix distributor. Ow, man, and my head did not clear that hood latch. So I think we're gonna have to do something a little bit different. This is really starting to get pretty disorganized over here, but I think this will work out. It's a funny looking apparatus on there, but all of that aside, that should surely clear everything. I'm not gonna say I'm particularly proud of what's going on here, but it should seal, and it does. Clear the hood just fine without any issues, so lesser of two evils. At least we're not getting dirt in our engine. So the ever relevant key bump test here. Nice. Except for that exhaust leak down here. Pretty cool. Since it's momentarily devolved into some shenanigans here for a moment, all right, I've come under fire in a recent video where I said that I was 6'5" in passing, and I generally don't talk about myself a lot here on YouTube. And a lot of people said that I'm lying. I don't know why I'd lie about my height, so I got a tape measure here and I'll show you, you know. And it's definitely nothing to be envious about. It just means your back hurts all the time. I'm doing great, but right where my finger is here, whatever this is, 6'5", 6'6", so there you go. All right, enough shenanigans. Let's drive this thing. Way too nice of a car for me to have. I do despise the automatic transmission though, but just kind of comes with the territory, I think. Shifter's a little squirrely. Neutral is reverse. Reverse is neutral. I don't know. Someone short must have been driving this car. Actually, I know they were pretty short. No offense, I know you're watching this. Hopefully I haven't ragged on you too bad. Alright, neutral kinda. Is that drive? That's drive, okay. That drive was short-lived. I just looked at the fuel gauge and it says empty. Does it work? I don't know, but I don't really have plans to get stranded today either. So back home we go. Cruising at like 5 miles an hour on the gravel road. Just way too nice of a car for this area. This is what I would consider to be an undesirable angle, to say the least, way down here at the bottom. Sounds good though. All right, perfect. The old farm rig. All right, here we go again. Apparently need to go on a diet. Good grief. Or just not wear my seatbelt and die like a man. There's always that option. That's 2. I do not like automatic transmissions. That's neutral. I'm gonna turn turn this thing around. I am not entirely convinced it's grabbing every gear that it's supposed to, so this would be a good time to actually break out the carb sheeter and have a tack, but I'm trying to do this old school. So I know that's one, okay. And that should be two. And that's neutral. I don't know what's going on. Oh, see, that's reverse. So that's neutral somewhere here. Neutral. Just creep it in. So that should be drive, right? So, oh boy. It's got plenty of power, that's for sure. 351 Cleveland here. It's not bad. That was probably 3/4 throttle. This isn't my car, so I'm not real keen on beating on stuff. For a little 2-barrel car with tall rear gears for highway cruising, this thing still has plenty of power. And I'm really resisting the urge to tow into it, but at the end of the day, this isn't my car, and I think, would I really want someone just beating the living snot out of my vehicle that they were supposed to tune for me? You know, at least I would rather him be in the driver's seat at this point, and then we see what's what. If he wants to mat it to the floor, that's his business. But, you know, 3/4 throttle, it definitely gets out of its own way. There's no mistake there. Yeah, it's definitely downshifting into first now. So, you know, it was me. I was the idiot. Couldn't tell from the indicator, you know. I was definitely putting it in 2. So, you know, we had like a 2-speed power glide thing going on there. But I think with that, my friends, I'm going to take this up to the gas station, and I think I have enough time to catch this farm auction. And if you go to any farm auctions, farmers just sell really neat stuff, super cheap. Is it super functional? No, you know, it's from the 50s and stuff, but man, it's cool. So I always just like seeing what goes across the block, and who knows, maybe something stupid will come home with me. Hopefully not, you know. Definitely probably won't make my wife very happy if I buy something. And that was just 1, 2, 3 again, so turns out I'm the idiot. What do you know? Me and automatics, man, we're just not friends. Man, dude, this thing runs awful good. I really wanted to put that 4-barrel on it, but it would almost just be a crime. It's just all original equipment. It's a very nice, well put together car. Drives good. Everything's just pretty good. It would just borderline be sacrilege to change anything at this point. I don't think the fuel gauge works, but other than that, everything's pretty good. The auction happens to be just outside of the jail. I've never been there yet, but there's definitely still time. Catching the front end of it here, so let's see if we can't go and buy something that we more than likely don't need, but it'll be cool because it'll be agricultural and probably from the 40s, 30s, or 50s. In that order. I did get myself a primo parking spot where you're not supposed to park, but you know, I don't think anyone's going to say anything, more than likely. Just hopefully it doesn't get auctioned off while I'm here.
Hangers and a box of pots and chemicals for your flowers in your yard.
Alright, the hose hangers and the chemicals, garden chemicals right there, it's all one money right there.
Alright, my friends, thanks for coming along with me today. I think we got this Torino all good and ironed out here. Weird story about the auction. I bought 2 things intentionally and one tractor accidentally. It's a long story, and I'll get into it in a different video, but yeah, what a weird experience. So now I have to figure out how to get all of these home, because, you know, naturally you buy them cheap because they don't run, because you're an idiot. So that's me, the idiot.